Next up, we're going to review how to factor trinomials. So what is a trinomial, first of all? A trinomial is a special kind of polynomial that has three terms. So in this case, we are starting with x squared minus 5x minus 6, which is an example of a trinomial. We have 1, 2, and 3 terms. So as usual, the very first thing you want to do is check if the GCF method applies or not. Can you factor anything out of these three terms? In this case, nothing is common to all three of them. So we abandon the GCF method and we turn into the new technique. Now this technique is known by different names. I like to call it the big X method. So I'm going to draw a little X that's going to be like my diagram. And I like to call it the big X method because it just kind of like, has a nice ring to it and it reminds people of doing the diagram. Some people know this as the sum product method. Some people know it as the trial and error method. No matter how you call it, the process is virtually the same all the time. Now, there are going to be two different types of X methods that I'm going to show you. There's some X methods like this one. It's going to be the simple one. And there's going to be another X method I'm going to show you down here in example part 3, where the X method is going to be a little bit more complicated. So let's start with the top one. How would I do the problem here? So first of all, what I'm going to check for is the number in front of the x squared. The number in this case is 1. So that makes it into a simple kind of a problem. So a simple, we don't have to modify the X method. So that's the easy kind basically. So since there's a 1, I'm going to ignore it and I'm just going to write down the -6 on top of my diagram. The -6 that I got from the end is going to be written down on top, and then the -5 from the middle is going to be on the bottom of the diagram. So that's what I usually do at the start of the process. Once I do that, I'm going to ask myself the question, can I find two numbers that when I multiply gives me -6, but when I add them, they give me -5? So there's a bunch of numbers that you multiply to get -6. For example, -1 times 6, there's 6 times -1, there's 2 times -3, there's -2 times +3. So all those numbers are numbers that when multiplied, they will give you -6. Now out of these options, is there a pair that when added together, the numbers inside the pair will give you -5? Oops, my first pair and my second pair look identical. So let me modify this a little bit. Let me make it +1 and -6. And that's actually the pair that's going to work. When you add 1 and -6 together, you will end up with the same -5 that we're looking for. So I'm going to write down my solutions +1 and -6 into the diagram. And always double check that you got the right numbers. It's not gonna hurt to double check. Multiply the two numbers together. 1 times -6 will be -6, so that's good. When you multiply them, you get the right number. And if you added them, +1 added to -6 will be the -5, so that's also good. So now that we have the right pair, it's very straightforward. We're just gonna write down a couple parentheses. We're gonna look at what's the letter in this problem. The letter is x squared. So to get it, we're going to put x in the first parentheses and then x again in the second parentheses. And finally, we just write down the numbers, +1 and -6. And that's pretty much the end of the process. This is it. You're completely done with this simple X method. Pause the video here and attempt to do the next problem. See if you can use what you learned to do this x squared minus 6x plus 8 factoring. So in my case, I looked again and I saw that there's a 1 in front of the x squared, which makes it into the simple diagram method. And my numbers have to multiply to 8, but when I add them, they have to add up to -6. And so the numbers turned out to be -2 and -4. And basically, I'm finished. Once I find the numbers, it's pretty straightforward. Just transfer it to the answer, and you're basically done with the problem. So that's how we do the simple version of this diagram method. Now, what about the slightly more complicated version, where we have a number in front of the x squared that is not a 1? So in this case, we have 2x squared minus 5x plus 3. How would we work out this problem? So first of all, because of the 2, we're going to have the modified version. So we cannot take any shortcuts in this case because of the 2. But what we do is this. We take the 2 and we take the 3 and we multiply them together. The answer will be 2 times 3 is 6. We put that on top of the diagram instead of just the 3. So again, we multiply the first number and the last number. We write the answer on top of the diagram. And as usual, we grab the -5 and we put it on the bottom of the diagram. And we do the same question. Can we find two numbers that multiply to 6? But when we add them, we get -5. So there's a few options. 1 times 6 will be 6 at the end. There's -1, -6. When you multiply them, you get 6 at the end. There's 2 and 3, and also -2 and -3. All those options multiply to 6, but we need to see which option adds up to -5. And in this case, -2 and -3 is the option that works. So those are my numbers that I need on the X diagram. Now some people here try to jump the gun and they go and write down X minus 2 and then X minus 3. And unfortunately, this is not totally 100% right. And you can test it out and see that it's not right by just multiplying the first X with the X. When you multiply them, you get X squared, not 2X squared like it's supposed to be. So don't jump the gun. Remember, there's no shortcuts to be taken in this case. So what we do instead is we turn the problem into a factor by grouping problem. So we're going to write down the 2x squared, which was the first term. And instead of the -5x, we're going to write down -2x and -3x. Basically, the numbers we got together with the letter x. And then finally, the +3 that was originally there. So the middle term gets erased and replaced with the two numbers that we found on the diagram. And now we have 4 terms, so we're going to factor by grouping. So what does the first pair have in common? What does the second pair have in common? We're going to do that whole strategy. So 2x is repeating in the first two terms, so that leaves us with x minus 1. The second terms both have 3, and also the first one is negative, so we factor the -3 out. That leaves us with x minus 1. Notice how the x minus 1 is repeating. That's always supposed to happen. The terms inside the parentheses should always be identical. So whatever this first one is, it's always going to match with the second one there. And we always grab it and we write it first. Once we're done, we put the 2x and the -3 together inside the parentheses, and that's the end. That's how you factor one of these no shortcut diagram problems. Again, take a moment to pause the video and see if you can do the 10a squared minus 9a plus 2 using a similar strategy. So here's what my work looks like for this one. So again, we start off with the 10a squared minus 9a plus 2. Because of the 10 and because we have a trinomial, we have to do this little diagram method. And again, this is not the only way to get to the answer. There are definitely other methods out there that might be slightly shorter or faster that you can use to get to the solution. And if you know one of them, great, good for you. Go ahead and do that. If you don't know anything and you want to learn this for the first time, then this is the strategy that I'm going to show you, and that's the one I'm using in this class. I like this one because it's pretty straightforward and it relies on other methods that we learned previously. So in any case, you're going to put your diagram, the 20, the -9, figure out that the numbers have to be -4 and -5, and swap the -9 that was inside the trinomial with the two numbers that you found, -4a and -5a in this case. And as you can see, the first terms are 10a squared and -4a. So the 10a squared is the same thing as 2 times 5 times a times a. The -4a squared is the same thing, the -4a is the same thing as -2 times 2 times a. As you can see, the 2 is repeating and the a is also repeating. That's the reason why I wrote 2a over on this side. The next two terms have -5a, which is -5 times a, and 2, which is literally 2 times 1. Again, there's nothing repeating, but I can imagine that there's a 1 that's also repeating. And my first term in this case is negative. So that's the reason why I'm factoring a -1 out. And that leaves me with 5x, minus 2. And so at this point, 5a minus 2 is the one that repeats. It's the parentheses that's shown up here and here again. So write it first and put all the leftovers inside the second parentheses. The 2a minus 1 get together inside the second parentheses, and we're basically finished.